Robert Griffin spent his entire life in a small town in northern Oregon. In the past, the old man had been a longtime ranger with the Wilderness Protection Unit against poachers. But finally, owing to poor health, he had to retire and settle down in a small cabin on the edge of the woods. Mr. Griffin divorced his wife many years ago, and his only daughter and her husband moved to New York, finding the metropolis more promising than a small town tucked away in the woods. Almost all of the locals knew Mr. Griffin by sight, and despite his age, treated him with respect and honor. The old man hated poachers with all his heart, and so out of old habit, he would drive around his former property, checking it for snares and other hunting traps. It had been a very snowy winter in Oregon, and Mr. Griffin could only navigate the woods by snowmobile. The old man made daily checks of the area, regardless of the weather conditions or his poor health. On this particular morning, the sky was overcast, and Mr. Griffin sensed that a snowstorm was approaching. But the old man couldn't kick his old habit, so he took his carbine, got on his snowmobile, and went on his way. No sooner than when Mr. Griffin got deep into the woods, somewhere nearby, gunshots were heard. The old man furrowed his brow, turned the steering wheel to guide the snowmobile toward the direction which the gunfire was originating. Soon, Mr. Griffin was in a large clearing resembling an enormous saucer. A sad scene unfolded before his eyes. 3 hunters, leaning on their rifles, were standing nearby, with bloodied wolves lying on the snow. The old man looked more closely and counted at least 5 dead predators. "What have you done? What right do you have to shoot these animals? And do you even have a license?" Mr. Griffin asked with no hesitation. But the sight of the frail, elderly man did not frighten the 3 poachers, who used their numerical superiority and their self-righteousness to feel as if they were in control. "Get out of here, old man. This is none of your business. We'll take care of this ourselves, and we don't need your advice," said one of them, whose red beard could be seen from afar. Mr. Griffin, understanding that the hunters were in a stronger position, gripped his old carbine tighter in his hands. All of a sudden, he spotted one of the wounded wolves moving its head and then its paw. Alive! Could that wolf have survived? Came a joyful thought to the old man's head, and he got down from his snowmobile and approached the poachers a little bit closer. "Get out of here! You don't belong here! A snowstorm is brewing, and I suggest you hit the road quickly. Otherwise, I'll blow out the gas tank on your snowmobiles, and then you'll experience the real vengeance of the surviving members of the wolf pack that are sure to be roaming around here somewhere," commanded Mr. Griffin, demonstratively slamming the bolt of his carbine. The poachers did not want to leave, but their hand had been forced. This evidently hadn't counted on the fact that the old man would be armed. If a skirmish had started, it wasn't clear who would win. The poachers, grumbling angrily, climbed onto their snowmobiles and fled in an unknown direction. Meanwhile, Mr. Griffin approached the injured wolf and saw that the wound, though it had exited sideways, required treatment and care. The old man took a piece of burlap from the trunk and wrapped it around the wolf so it wouldn't bite him on his way home. On his way back, Mr. Griffin intentionally drove slowly so as to not disturb the wounded wolf too much. The predator behaved quietly, moaning softly whenever the snowmobile drove over a bump or a rock hidden in the snow. All right, be a little patient. I'll bandage you up," whispered the old man, stopping the snowmobile practically on top of the door. On the doorstep, Mr. Griffin was met by his faithful dog, Jack, who had been waiting impatiently for his master's return. Taking the wolf in his arms, the old man brought it inside the house and put it next to the smoldering fireplace. Surprisingly, the raptor behaved peacefully and didn't lash out. The wolf was apparently very weak after having lost a lot of blood, and so it was quite docile, entrusting its life to the man. Mr. Griffin, owing to his former profession, knew how to administer first aid for gunshot wounds, so he managed quickly. Afterwards, realizing that the wolf was still weak, the old man poured milk into a bowl and put it in front of the beast's face. The predator sniffed the food cautiously at first, and then began to gently lap up the sweet-smelling white liquid. "Oh, that's a good sign. He's sure to get better soon. And what an appetite he's got on him," thought Mr. Griffin with satisfaction. When the wolf had fallen asleep, Jack, as if realizing that the wolf was sick, lay down next to him, trying to warm him with his body. Tears came to the old man as he watched, and salty drops of water burned his cheeks, reddened with frost. Since the wolf required daily care and bandaging, Mr. Griffin decided to keep him in the house until he was fully recovered. The old man named the young wolf Buddy by his friendly and compliant nature. Less than a week after, the forest beast was on its feet and felt quite well. Nevertheless, the wolf looked sorrowfully at the closed door, which separated him from the woods. "What, buddy? Do you hear the call of your ancestors, kid? Well, all right, you go on and chase those rabbits." Mr. Griffin smiled and opened the door. Buddy, sensing freedom, rushed out into the yard and began to tumble happily in the snow. He was immediately joined by Jack, who had become very attached to the wolf and considered him a best friend and brother. "Hey buddy, don't you go luring my dog into the woods. I don't think he'll ever want to come back to me," said Mr. Griffin jokingly. But to his surprise, Jack didn't follow the wolf into the woods, as if sensing that his fellow wolves were waiting in the woods. "Well, I guess Buddy won't be coming back," the old man thought, watching the wolf trudge through the drifts and bolt towards the woods. 2 days went by, during which time Jack whimpered at the door, yearning for his woodland friend. On the 3rd day, Buddy came back on his own. The young wolf stood on one spot, hesitantly, as if too shy to enter the old man's house. "Buddy, what's the matter with you, my boy? You're not sick?" Mr. Griffin asked, with concern in his voice. But then, the old man saw a young female wolf, likely Buddy's friend, cautiously emerge from behind a tree. With an understanding smile, the old man took 2 bowls outside and filled them to the brim with luscious porridge and meat. "Eat up, dears. That's enough for me," whispered Mr. Griffin, looking with affection at the wolf couple devouring the tasty delicacy. Jack, tail wagging, was circling Buddy and his friend the entire time. The dog was a little confused by the presence of the she-wolf, who every now and then shot a wary glance at him. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," laughed Mr. Griffin and patted Jack on the scruff. Time passed, and following the harsh snowy winter came the timid beauty of spring. Mr. Griffin had become so accustomed to the wolves' daily visit that he had long considered them pets. All the more so, the wolf couple had begun to come with presents in the form of hare and bird carcasses. On one occasion, Buddy even brought part of a deer carcass, earning a disapproving look and a finger wag from Mr. Griffin. Since the old man lives near the woods, his friendship with the wolves did not inconvenience the townspeople. Only the 3 poachers, who had encountered Mr. Griffin in the winter in the forest clearing, carried a grudge against him. The old man had no doubt that the scoundrels lived somewhere nearby, but did not want to search for them, reasoning rightfully that life itself would punish the poachers. However, the vengeful poachers had decided otherwise, and on a dark spring evening, they broke into his house. All 3 of them reeked from a mile away with alcohol and had transformed them into real animals. "Well, old man, it's payback time," muttered the hunter with the red beard. "What are you talking about? I don't owe you anything. Get out of here," Mr. Griffin said indignantly, and was immediately struck in the chest with the butt of a rifle. Falling to the floor, the old man realized that the poachers had no excuse not to kill him. Mr. Griffin knew that by making his daily rounds of the territory, he was keeping the illegal hunters from their dark business. But the old man had no time to develop that thought, for the 2 lean shadows, one gray, the other brown, burst through the wide-open door. It was Buddy and Jack, who had been frolicking at the edge of the forest. Growling furiously, the dog and the wolf pounced on their master's attackers. In an instant, the room was filled with the terrifying screeching and growling of Mr. Griffin's 4-legged guardians. If the red-headed poacher hadn't used his gun, there would have been nothing left of the 3 miscreants. But as it was, a shot rang out, and with a short squeal, Buddy collapsed on his side. Mr. Griffin, not afraid of the poachers, rushed to the aid of his gray friend, who had been shot in the side, most likely hitting his internal organs. Jack, spotting his wounded friend, pounced on the uninvited guest with increased vigor, forcing them to flee. The poachers might have escaped, but unfortunately for them, Mr. Griffin had access to an emergency channel with the County Wildlife Management Office. A search party was immediately dispatched in pursuit of the killers and came upon them 2 miles from the house. As it turned out, the 3 poachers were already wanted by police in a neighboring state for several offenses against wildlife. But to Mr. Griffin, apprehending the crooked poachers was of little consolation. What depressed the old man was that Buddy's condition, despite the help of the town's vet, was worsening every day. Mr. Griffin did what he could, never leaving the wounded wolf for a minute. Tragically, despite all their efforts to care for him, a week later, Buddy died. Jack, distraught with grief, whimpered for days on end, and looked longingly out into the forest, which was coming back to life after a harsh winter. The faithful dog was waiting that his gray friend, like before, would come to him from the woods to chase hares and squirrels together. But Buddy, of course, never came. A month after his death, some strange visitors showed up to Mr. Griffin's house. It was a female wolf with 3 pups. The gray-haired mother, remembering the kindness of Mr. Griffin, brought her little pups there, where they were always received with the help and assistance they needed. As Mr. Griffin thought of Buddy in heaven, he thought Buddy probably watched them right then and there from up above, and in his heart rejoiced that his offspring were given the right to live.